Welcome to the Heart of Law podcast. My name is Mirena Umizaj, and I'm your host. I am having so much fun with this podcast project to the point that I can't wait to record the next episode. I have learned so much from my guests throughout the 2 years I've been doing this that it truly has enriched my personal and my professional career. Today's guest is very special to me. His name is Attorney Marlon Kimpson with Motley Rice. I have known Marlon for 12 years. We were just talking about it right before we started to record. And it is amazing because in those 12 years, I have seen Marlon just beat his own record every single year and just become the best version of himself. I don't know that that's possible, but this man just somehow makes it happen. He has so much fire in his belly, a need for impact, actively giving to his family, his law firm, his community, his state, and now the country. Somebody I deeply respect and admire. Marlon's practice focuses on aviation, consumer fraud protection, personal injury and wrongful death, securities litigation, technology and media, transportation, and more recently, the opioid litigation, where he helped secure over $500 million for the state of South Carolina. He received his law degree from University of South Carolina in 1999. Marlon is a former South Carolina state senator for District 42 and represented citizens of Charleston and Dorchester counties for nearly a decade. Marlon's advocacy and leadership extends beyond the courtroom, including his appointment by President Biden in 2023 to serve on the White House Advisory Committee for Trade Policy and Negotiations. So, Marlon, thank you for being here today, for making time for me. It is a pleasure to have you on, my friend.
Well, I appreciate it, Mirena. It's almost like homecoming. We were just talking about when we first met in Chicago. At one of the early Mass Tort Made Perfect and also AAJ events. So it's so good to be with you. I'm proud of you equally, and I couldn't pay for a better endorsement as you recited that so eloquently. I am all that and a bag of chips.
I mean, honestly, it's like I look back and I follow you on LinkedIn and, social media platforms. And I couldn't believe it. Because when we met, you were an attorney. I think President Obama was running for office in 2012. We were in Chicago. There was so much energy. There's so much dynamic. I really didn't see it all coming. And so you went into politics, something we're going to cover. But what an amazing decade you've had, right? Like looking back at your life, how do you reflect when you see how much has been accomplished?
Well, I was telling my mother today, it's been a lot of hard work. Yeah. You see me at Motley Rice and locally on television championing the cause of the underdog.
Right.
But the reality of the situation is oftentimes I don't sleep. Mm-hmm. I work a lot. And as you know, I have 2 small kids. But when I look at successful people, when I say success, that's a relative term, and that's very subjective too. But I mentioned my kids because that's my first priority, my family. But after my family is taken care of, when I have gas in the tank, it's time to push the pedal.
Yeah.
And I feel like for over a decade, I've been pushing the pedal, making sure that I continue to push the envelope and ask myself what's next. Mm-hmm. And quite frankly, I don't think I'm going to ever be complacent. To whom much is given, much is required. And that's sort of the guiding principle of my life. And we can get into a little bit about that more later when we cover my background.
Yeah. So 50,000 foot view. It's a lot of hard work. It is not what it looks on pictures and videos and press conferences, right? But it requires a ton, and it's not just intellectual, energy. It is spiritual energy. It is you making sure your kids are taken care of so that you can go continue to serve. And all you're doing is you're serving. So how do you fill up the tank before you start serving?
Well, I come from a home. My dad was an educator. Both my parents were in education. My dad ended up going into state government where he worked for Governor Richard Riley, a Democratic governor in the state of South Carolina, whose seminal legislation was the passage of the Education Improvement Act, which put money in our rural school system to help, in part, try to address the needs of the corridor of shame, a corridor in poor South Carolina that's considered the poverty area of the state. My dad worked with him on that. My mom was a Title I school teacher to help kids who were having challenges in reading read better. I matriculated in public school where my parents were very, very instrumental in my upbringing. After public school, I went to Morehouse College. And there, Mirena, was the first foundation of my drive. My drive was molded and mentored. Morehouse College is an all African American male college in Atlanta, Georgia. Some famous graduates: Martin Luther King Jr., Maynard Jackson, who's the former mayor of the city of Atlanta, Spike Lee, a very famous producer, Samuel Jackson. And the list goes on and on of leaders who are very inspirational. Well, at Morehouse, our freshman year, we had chapel. And the president of the chapel at the time is now United States Senator Raphael Warnock, who was a buddy of mine in college. And he would assemble us on Tuesdays, and we would hear the great orators, African-American orators from across the nation. And the unifying message, or the message that I would take home every Tuesday, and we had to go every Thursday too, to chapel. I go to church now, but not 2 times a week. But you have to have drive. And it's only okay to be number 2 if you tried your hardest to be number 1. Excuses are not acceptable. And as long as you give it your best, you can rest. But if you know you haven't given your best, and you should be the best, you can't rest. And I have developed this brotherhood of people that I went to college with, who I'm still in contact with today. I don't miss a homecoming. Homecoming is October. I have it blocked off. But my network of strong African-American men, many of which are attorneys, we continue to aspire to encourage each other today. I just left the courthouse 2 months ago in Augusta. And we worked on a very, very big case. And it was a great resolution on behalf of our client. But that case and my referral network is often cases that I have developed from my colleagues who are lawyers and some who are not at Morehouse College. So it's a great brotherhood and fraternity, but that formed the foundation of my drive and the aspiration to be the best in whatever endeavor I dedicate my time to.
I forget how much I love your South Carolina accent, but I love it. But let me ask you this, Marlon. Do you think drive is something somebody is born with, or is this something you can teach?
Well, I used to do a class at Motley Rice,
Yeah.
Business Development 101. And I think many skills you can teach.
You can teach it.
Many skills, not all skills.
Yeah.
Some are innate.
Yeah.
But the bottom line is there's no rocket science to it. You have to put in the sweat equity. You have to recognize the opportunity and move fast. You know, we live in a real world environment. I was just having this discussion, and today's news is old.
Right.
And if you aren't able to adapt, if there's an accident or something, we watch the markets because I do securities litigation. When it's printed in the paper, generally it's, you know, people have moved already to go to their clients to discuss the headline. And so a lot of it is hustle and a stick-to-itiveness and an intuition. And those are all intangible things that I don't know that you can teach.
Yeah.
One of the things that I would do, and you mentioned my Southern accent.
Yeah.
When I was growing up, I was always fascinated by politics.
Okay.
My dad never ran for political office until the latter part of his years, but he was always politically active. And he would make us read certain magazines. We'd have to read Ebony. We'd have to read Black Enterprise. We'd have to read U.S. News and World Report, all of which are most on electronically. But when those were in print version, I used to get them till I was very after college. So I would be a subscriber to all those magazines. Now they're electronic. But I would read about great people, and outside of reading, I would watch great people deliver oratory.
Mm-hmm.
I would watch, for example, Governor Bill Clinton, when he was governor, deliver a speech, one of the greatest orators of our time. I would watch Jesse Jackson when he accepted the Democratic National, when he was giving his presidential speech. For the nomination of the president. Of course, he didn't win, but he was one of the best orators.
Right.
I would watch Mayor Andrew Cuomo and how he graced the rostrum in the audience and just inspired people to get up and go. And so even today, I watch great ones.
Yeah.
And that a lot of that has become learned behavior, the art of engagement and communication. And I use those skills in the courtroom to this day. So you can learn some things, although some of it is natural. There are a lot of things you can learn from other people.
No, that's a great way to explain that, because, you know, I'm raising two kids, and, you know, you think, gosh, what's wrong with this new generation, right? I feel like every generation, you know, says that about the next generation, and then I'm catching myself say it. And how do I teach my kids, you know, work ethic and discipline and to be a go-getter? Because, you know, I'm a go-getter, and I put in the sweat equity, but I don't see that in my kids at all. It's you know, I have a 16-year-old that says, you know, aren't I supposed to do what I love to do? And I say, yeah, but that means hard work too. So it is.
Little do you know they're watching you. You may not think it's going to pay off because, quite frankly, my dad, I have two brothers, older brother, and both of them were academicians. They got the top awards.
Yeah.
And I remember my two brothers' history teacher in high school coming to me. He taught my oldest brother and my middle brother, and he came to me one day after grading my exam and said, son, I know you're the third son. Your parents must have given up on you. You're nothing like your two brothers. And the bottom line is I wasn't in terms of academics, but
Yeah.
a lot of the inspiration, obviously I am where I am, and my oldest brother now is a judge, and he and I talk often. But the point of this whole story is I watched my dad.
Mm.
And while I may not have been textbook as smart as my dad and my two brothers, I would watch him. And a lot of those things that he never knew I was watching,
Yeah.
rubbed off on me. And I suspect with your daughters, both daughters, two daughters,
Daughter and son. My little one is
son, I watch you, and you are a go-getter. You're a hustler. You don't leave anything on the table. You are always working, and that will rub off. Whether you see it now or not, it will rub off. So keep doing what you're doing.
From you to God's ear. All right, so let's get into, we talked a little bit about your early sort of beginnings, and I didn't know that. So thanks for sharing. I love knowing the nuances of how people become who they become. But let's talk about, you decided to become a lawyer. You wanted to go to law school. And I've talked to obviously a lot of attorneys on this podcast, and they say, it's not, law is not what I thought it was when I was going to law school. And some, were lost for a while and had to find themselves in the law practice, and others just kind of came out swinging. Where were you in that spectrum? Did you love law school? Did you come out of law school knowing exactly what you'd become or who you'd be? Walk me through that journey.
Well, and it's an important part of my story. First of all, when I came out of undergrad, I just pledged an undergraduate fraternity. I'm an Omega Psi Phi. You sometimes see football players do that. That means they're a member of my fraternity. But in college, I pledged a fraternity. And while my focus should have been on academics, it was really on the fraternity and the social that came. I mentioned that I went to Morehouse all-male school, but what I didn't tell you is we had an all-female school, Spelman College, right across the street. I spent more time at Spelman than I probably should have. And as a result, I did not score as high on the LSAT. So I could not get into law school. There was no program that I got accepted into. So back then, I decided to go into banking. I spent five years in banking.
Okay.
But I knew in life you got to find your calling.
Yeah.
And I knew that was not my calling, because within a very short period of time, I lost concentration.
Yeah.
But I knew I had to do something that I really, really wanted to do. So what I would do back then, the bank would close at 3:00. I was in a small town, Anderson, South Carolina, making boat loans, car loans, and home equity loans. And one day, one of my clients, my customers at the bank, drove his tractor to the branch. I was in a rural part at that time near Clemson University. It wasn't what it is now, but it was a rural area. And I was on the phone with my buddy from Chicago, and my nickname is Kemp. He said, "Kemp, what's all that noise in the background?" I said, "That's just Billy and his tractor. He comes every Wednesday to make his deposit." And he says, "Marlon, we did not expect you to be in Anderson, South Carolina, being a banker for farmers. We expected you to go out and do big things." And right then and there, I said, you know what? I got to find my calling in life. So I ended up studying for the LSAT. The bank would close at 3:00. I'd leave 3:00 and I'd start studying LSAT, because according to all the law schools I applied to, that's where I was falling short. And I ultimately got into law school after 5 years in banking. And I really had a concentration, a single-minded focus to do well in law school. And that's how I ended up matriculating at the University of South Carolina School of Law, now the Joseph F. Rice School of Law at the University of South Carolina. I did fairly well because I had had the experience of 5 years of banking, and I was more determined to do although I didn't have the largest LSAT scores, but I was more determined to do well academically in school. And so that's how I started my trajectory into the field of law from banking after having been denied admission into law school. My LSAT scores improved by all of that studying. And then I had the opportunity to do a federal clerkship in the state of South Carolina. The first African-American judge on the federal bench was Matthew J. Perry, a civil rights icon. And it happened to be, he and my dad were good friends, and he told my dad that if I were ever interested in a federal clerkship, to come talk to him. Okay. And of course, I had to have the grades, but I interviewed with Judge Perry, and I learned so much under his tutelage. In fact, the district court, the District of South Carolina Columbia Division Courthouse, is named in honor of Judge Matthew Perry, and many have been educated and tutored and clerked for Judge Perry. Our most recent Biden appointee to the federal bench, Jackie Austin, clerked for Judge Perry. Judge Michelle Childs, who's now ascended to the DC, the DC Court of Appeals, the stepping stone to the United States Supreme Court, was a mentee to mentor Judge Matthew Perry. So the greats sat at the foot of Judge Perry. And I clerked for him for 2 years, and then the rest is history. I began my legal practice with Motley Rice. Now, the interesting part, and you can stop me because I can go on all day about this.
No. You're just answering all the other questions. You're in a good flow. Keep going.
Good. The interesting thing is, when in law school, they never really talk about plaintiff litigation. And so I would watch the board, on campus visits of all the employers coming. And obviously, being a fairly older student after 5 years of banking, I was most interested in the jobs that paid the most. So I interviewed with a big defense firm, and they hired me for their summer clerkship. Not only did they like me, but I think they really liked me, not so much for my academic grades, although I had good grades at the time, but I was a former banker. So from a business perspective, they were trying to do business with the bank that I was employed by. And so that was a big defense firm. But again, in life, you got to find your calling. And I would sit all day. This was an internship, a law clerkship. I would sit all day and get through the secured transaction documents. And I said to myself, self, this is not for you. I didn't go to law school to look at secured transactions and try to figure out the UCC code. I'm not sitting in this closet billing in increments of 10 minutes at a time to count widgets. So in law school, I was a member of a society called the Palmetto Law Society, and that was a fancy word for the beer drinking society. And we would drink beer pretty much regularly once a week with other law students. And I met a guy named Matthew Richardson. Matthew is still one of my good friends today, but his dad was Terry Richardson. And at the time, Terry Richardson was the managing partner of Ness, Motley, Lode, Holt, Richardson, and Poole. And that is one of the predecessor firms of what we know now called Motley Rice. Okay. Went to lunch with Terry, and he told me that he wanted me to come work for the firm. And the rest is history. I graduated from law school. The number one guy in our class and the number one on paper academically, Jim Bradley, who's a good friend of mine now, and then me. We were offered jobs at Ness, Motley, Lode, Hope, Richardson, and Poole. And the interesting thing about that is Terry invited us to the airport one day. Mm-hmm. And we were clerking for Ness Motley at the time. I'm going to abbreviate it. And he suggested that we carry an additional T-shirt. We met him at the airport, and this jet just rolls in. We're at the private airport. I thought we were just going to meet him so he could hand us an assignment. He said, "Get on this plane, Marlon and Jim." And we fly off to a Rolling Stones concert.
Wow.
And on the way back, he slides us an envelope with an opening offer. Now, keep in mind, I had been working for this big defense firm all the time during law school. Yeah. And I went and told the partner of secured transactions at this big defense firm that I got an offer over the weekend on a jet at a Rolling Stones concert. And he asked me, "Well, who made you the offer?" I said, "Ness Motley, Richardson, Lode, Holden, Poole, Terry Richardson." He says, "Listen, go home, do your research. If you ever want to come back, you can always come back to the big defense firm and help me count widgets.
Yeah.
But if you want to go to that firm, and I suggest you do, you should take that offer." I have not talked to that secured transaction attorney since that time. I mean, I've run into him, but I immediately accepted the offer, and I've never set foot back in a secured transactions firm. Not to say that they don't do great things; they do great things, but it was not my calling, Marie.
Yeah.
So I found my calling.
It's funny because it's like something a plaintiff lawyer would do when they really want to make an impression.
I didn't even talk about the liquor we drank on the plane.
I mean, because I'm around them so much.
That's right.
It's all about that. So I totally see it. It's like I'm a fly on the wall, or in the jet. But it's such a funny, story to hear and meaningful, of course. But it's in true fashion to a plaintiff firm.
Right.
Wow. So you've been there from the beginning. I didn't know that you've been there from the beginning of your, law career. Can you share with the audience a little bit more about Motley Rice, what the firm focuses on, and then how it allowed you to then chase your next great adventure, which is politics?
Sure. I started out in asbestos.
Okay.
Of course, Motley Rice really is in part responsible for holding the asbestos manufacturers and other defendants accountable for the misdeeds of exposing primarily workers, but as you know, housewives and bystanders have also been exposed, and developing all types of lung-related illnesses, asbestos, pleural thickening, pleural plaques, all the way up to mesothelioma cases, which is a fatal form of cancer that's really only known cause, with few exceptions, is exposure to asbestos. So I cut my teeth, like most members of the firm, on asbestos cases. And I was all over the country, but primarily I was assigned to Kentucky, Mississippi, and Alabama. Mm-hmm. Now, first 2 years, I asked myself, why would Joe Rice send a black man to Paducah, Kentucky, and Jackson, Mississippi, and all over the state of Alabama? Well, Joe wasn't really concerned about race. He was concerned about someone having the ability to vigorously prosecute the asbestos cases and hold the defendants liable for the misdeeds as a result of these workers having these illnesses.
Yeah.
And he knew that if I could cut my teeth in Paducah, Kentucky, which only is known as the quilt capital of the world, quilting, many weekends I missed the plane and I'd sit next to people quilting all weekend. I didn't want to miss that plane, and I would argue to the defendants, let's hurry the hell to get out of here because I got to catch this plane out of Paducah, Kentucky. The only they had very few restaurants and hotels. JR's Executive Inn on the river, and if you missed that plane on Friday, you were going to be there the whole weekend with the quilters. Joe figured if Marlon can do a great job in Paducah, he can go anywhere. And that's what I did. I had a lot of asbestos cases in Jackson, Mississippi, working with co-counsel. We have a 50-state, actually, we got more. We got co-counsel all across the country and world now. But back then, we had a 50-state co-counsel strategy. And since we were the architects of the litigation, lawyers from all across the country would refer us cases.
Yeah.
And so after being in the courthouses across the country, starting again in really the southern tip of the country and going to Paducah and Mississippi and Alabama, New Orleans, Louisiana, I quite frankly wanted to do something else. And we had just Mary Schiavo, who is an acclaimed aviation litigator, joined our firm. She had left the federal. She was office of the federal inspector in charge of the FAA. I'm sure I'm butchering her title, but she was a bigwig, and she patrolled the FAA. So she had a lot of experience, and she brought with her, at that time we were litigating, representing people on behalf or against who we alleged to be the financiers of terror. This was in the aftermath of the 9/11. She joined our firm and she opened Aviation litigation, our practice group. And she asked me to become a member because what we quickly observed was that there were planes going down, not just in the United States, but across the world. And oftentimes what happens is the United States sells its old fleet to foreign country companies in foreign countries, right, because they don't have the regulatory burden of operating in the United States, and they're not as regulated in those countries like the FAA in the United States. And there's a correlation between poor countries and people of color. And so what was happening is we noticed that there were a lot more crashes in Central America, South America, and these smaller countries where they are people of color. Yeah. And so what often happens in an air crash case is you got to get to the scene.
Yeah.
Because it's strict liability, essentially. Right. The question is who signs the case. And this is why diversity is important, among other things.
Yeah.
But having people that look like people who are victims, yeah, gives you somewhat of a competitive advantage. So you want a diverse team so that something happens in a country, you can send people in your office who look like those people. Now, I'd oftentimes have translators because I couldn't speak. But at first blush, for example, I worked in Martinique, French Antilles, and they didn't know I wasn't one of them until I started talking. But I had a translator who spoke French. Yeah. I go to Bimini, I go to Brazil. And so we had to recognize the unique marketing opportunity. We already had the substantive skills because I would have a team with me. So I did aviation litigation for a few years until our securities practice. And that's a long story, but I'm happy to tell you about that as we sort of evolve. I didn't know if you had any additional questions about asbestos and aviation, but I'm here to.
No, I think what I'm curious to know, Marlon, is with Motley Rice, obviously, this is a firm that has just grown and dominated in so many ways. A lot of mass litigation, complex litigation. And so you've kind of been there to see the transformation from the beginning. In fact, I remember when we first met, one of the things I wanted to do is I was early in my career. I really wanted to work with your firm, and you made it possible for me to come in and meet with your firm. And I remember meeting with Mary, actually, as you mentioned her name, and just leaving the firm thinking, just wow, right? In terms of cutting edge, doing the most challenging, difficult, yet successful litigations of our history to date. So what has it been like for you as you've gone through, asbestos and aviation and all these the securities? What has it been like for you as a lawyer? Is it validating? Is it questioning maybe sometimes whether or not this is exactly what you want to do? Because you do sit in a very unique position with this firm in this state, being able to reach the country and beyond, right? All over the world, essentially.
Our motto is causes and not cases.
Yeah.
And that motto was born out of Ron Motley and Joe Rice's desire to hold the most egregious, largest companies responsible for harming people.
Yeah.
And I don't care who the defendant is. I don't care how much market capitalization, how many resources they have. It's really a challenge for us to expose wrongdoing.
Yeah.
It's not just a banner or a motto that we don't live by. I can remember working on what I call the chicken shit case, where we represented the state of Oklahoma against all or many of the growers and producers of chicken. And what they were doing in these chicken houses is washing the chicken manure into the river. Of course, after years and years of contamination, that manure started to pollute the river. And of course, all of the bacteria headed downstream. My point is, I still don't, that was over 10 years ago. And I still don't think that case is resolved. The 9/11 case, where we rounded up 14 some odd countries who we believe, I'm sorry, it's not 14, but there are a number of different governmental entities, mainly Saudi Arabia and others, who we believe had some responsibility for funding the Al-Qaeda network, which caused the horrific acts of 9/11. That case is still being litigated today. I was a year ago, I was in New York federal court in a preliminary motion to dismiss hearing. It wasn't a motion to dismiss, but it was a preliminary motion before the motion to dismiss. And so people look at our successes and they've seen settlements, but what many don't realize is that Joe Rice and Ron Motley were determined to put their money on the line. And as long as it took to hold some egregious conduct or actor responsible, they were all in. If we wanted to play it safe, we would have stayed with just doing those things that the firm started on, asbestos.
Yeah.
Because even today, asbestos still, particularly the bankruptcy, still pay something. But this is a firm that looks at a complex situation and identifies the corporate problem. You got a problem. BP oil spill, Volkswagen, tobacco, that's the opioids. I could go on and on. I got to get some water because there's so many. but we dedicate the time, the resources, and the lawyers. And I got to tell you, this has been very fulfilling, which actually led me to get into securities litigation and now expand my MDL practice. I got a call shortly after the financial collapse in 2008. We started our first securities practice. They recognized that I had represented many labor unions, the United Steelworkers, the paper workers, the building trades, and asbestos. So I had all these relationships traveling around the country, meeting with workers. And what we now were proposing is to represent those same pension funds, because many of these unions have Taft-Hartley pension plans. Mm-hmm. And so we used our relationships there to be our first securities clients. We also had an arsenal of relationships with governmental entities because we had represented them in asbestos, in governmental litigation, abatement, and also in tobacco. I think Motley Rice represented more state AGs in the tobacco litigation than we represented than any other firm in the country. Now, don't quote me on that, but that's what I think. And it's still, the tobacco resolution is still, to my knowledge, the largest resolution of any case in American jurisprudence. Mm-hmm. Somebody can fact check me on that, but I think I'm right. Yeah. And so I got thrust into the securities practice. And now our securities practice, which I head I'm one of the leaders of the securities practice. We have over 30 domestic clients and around 10 or 12 international clients. And quite frankly, just achieved one of the largest resolutions of any securities litigation case in history, the Twitter case that settled about 2 years ago for $800 million. I'm currently applying for leadership in a case in the Northern District of California, a shareholder derivative case, to hold Wells Fargo accountable for their discriminatory hiring and lending practices. And so we have this robust securities practice, which has increased our diversity. And when I talk to pension funds across the country, I cite our diversity in practice groups. Mm-hmm. If there is a case against a car manufacturer, I just walk down the hall and talk to one of my colleagues who practices auto defect litigation. Mm-hmm. And so a securities case is not unlike any other complex case. You got to have the right experts to tell you how the publicly traded company misled investors. What did he or she or the company say? Well, if you don't know the underlying conduct, and oftentimes they're pharmaceutical, they're auto defects, they may be aviation related, there has to be some egregious conduct. And the publicly traded company had to make a material misrepresentation to investors. Having a diverse practice where you can walk down the hall and everybody just doesn't do securities, but they do other types of lines of litigation, you can draw on the expertise. It helps your bench. It helps your clients. It makes for a better resolution of a case. And that's quite frankly how I got into the MDL world. But that's a whole nother, I'm co-lead in a major data breach case. I don't know that we have time to talk about it, but it's important because as we look at the federal court docket, the majority of cases now in federal court are MDLs. You know that from your experience with many cases, including Lejeune, to name one. But multi-district litigation is now a hot area in the plaintiff's bar, and you have to have trained lawyers who apply for leadership who have a background, because that's one of the elements that the federal judges look at: experience, resources, the ability to have a firm that has seen a lot, for lack of better words. And so I'm now applying for MDL roles. I was most recently granted, when I say recently, this was 3 years ago, a co-lead role in a large data breach case by Judge, at that time, federal court Judge Michelle Childs. Now, of course, as I've mentioned, she's on the DC Court of Appeals. And so I am currently litigating that MDL. And in January, I will argue to be part of the leadership in a shareholder derivative case. It's not an MDL, but it's still a large case with paramount importance for the country.
Yeah. So I do want to kind of hover around the multi-district litigation topic for a bit, because, it is more and more, becoming bigger, and some can argue better, some can say no to that. But the point is that we're seeing larger litigations as time goes on. And it's not because some people say, well, you have so much money pouring into the legal business and so much marketing and advertising, and you're just capturing, not even good, legitimate clients or claims. And this is just across the board, by the way. So how are you guys keeping up in terms of, your firm, I know, is a big firm, and there is how many lawyers? Probably over.
We have, it varies, but I'd say in the neighborhood of 120 lawyers.
20 lawyers, probably 300, 400 support staff.
About.
Right. So, look at Lejeune. Lejeune is, hundreds of thousands of people, and it's North Carolina, South Carolina, and the neighboring states. And it's just mind-boggling. So it's only getting bigger, and there is a ton of money going into the legal business, and you've got politics, and you've got, law, and you've got consumers that are being affected. It's like all intertwined, and I can see obviously how easy it is to cross the line from being a litigator to going into the political arena and trying to make the impact. And we'll talk a little bit more about your background there and sort of where you are today. But in terms of Motley Rice, the scope, is the idea to continue expanding and growing, or are you guys focusing on some of these niche areas, which I would argue now that they've been ongoing for a couple decades? So I guess my question is general in nature: is what's the future of Motley Rice? Because it can only get bigger, but I don't know if bigger is better, right?
Sure. Well, let me just be clear. I'm not here to speak for Joe Rice.
Sure.
He can tell you where we're going in the future, and he can represent from that perspective. From my own perspective, as a member at the firm, at its core level, you have to have experienced, competent lawyers. And so we seek to hire and retain the best and brightest. And that's really subjective, because there are all types of skills, as you've witnessed, in that are ingredients that make up a successful law firm. You got to have people who are very good at research. You have to have very good people who draft motions and put together arguments. Yeah. You have to have very seasoned and experienced trial lawyers.
Yeah.
And then I don't care how big the verdict may be, you got to hold it on appeal. So that takes a special kind of a lawyer as well. And so what we've done here is we have hired the best and brightest, and we try to retain those individuals. I've already explained that we are diversified.
Yeah.
So when it comes to multi-district litigation, regardless of the subject area, we have generally had lawyers in this office who've dealt with the type of cases that are being contemplated in federal court.
Yeah.
One of the elements that you have to be selected for leadership is you have to have the resources.
Right.
And so we have been stewards of our success. We've donated a lot. As you saw, Joe Rice recently donated more than $30 million to the University of South Carolina School of Law, and that has been written about, but he's also been generous in so many other areas, like a lot of other prominent. He's not the only one. I think he's the only one that I know of that has a state law school named after him. But so you have to be frugal and stewards of your resources, give back, but also you got to save some for the next day because you never know what's coming down the pipeline.
Sure.
So I think those two elements prepare us for what's coming in the future. Now, let me address the sort of the elephant in the room, and you referenced it, litigation financing. It's a new day now. Okay. There are many private equity firms. There are many other financial organizations that are in this space. Once upon a time, you had to have a law firm finance these cases. That's no longer the case. And so to my knowledge, we have not used litigation funding. I'm not speaking for the firm, but that's just to my knowledge, because we've been fortunate enough to have those resources, as I've referenced. But there are a lot of new players on the scene, some of which have all of the assets that I've mentioned that Motley Rice has, some not. I think it's still the best system in the country where the federal judge makes the decision on leadership. Sure. And they have a difficult job of balancing all of the competing interests necessary to formulate a team that is going to do great by the plaintiffs that they represent. And so it's tough work. We don't always get selected. We don't always win our cases, but our odds have been pretty good so far. And I can say without fear of contradiction, we are prepared for whatever comes that are in the future, because we've been good stewards with the successes that we've had.
I mean, that's true. There's no doubt about that. There's a lot of truth to that. And, you have also carved new ways for the legal world in so many ways. I think it has been the amount of resources and the amount of manpower and everything in between that's taken some of these larger litigations to the finish line, opioids, tobacco, just to name a few. Do you find that it is getting better in terms of diversity with the leadership slates? Tell me your experience on that.
I'm a product of that. And when you talk about diversity, most people talk about it from the perspective of let's do good.
Right.
Let's be inclusive because that's the right thing to do. Yes, that is the right thing to do. But if you want to win, you got to have a diverse team. Yeah. It just makes good business sense. Why? Why, Marlon? I'm glad you asked. Because when you are trying a case to the jury, there are all types of people on that jury. When you're talking to a federal court, you may be in front of what is now the most diverse bench in this nation's history. President Biden has appointed more people of color and women than any other president.
Yeah.
Just in his short time in office, I know he only has one more year, but in 3 years, he's named more diversity to the bench than any other president.
Yeah.
And so not only the jury now is diverse, but the judges are more diverse.
Yeah.
So it's a good business practice to have people who have a different thought process.
Yeah.
We don't want to litigate in a vacuum. You want diversity of thought, not just because it's the good thing to do, but if you want to make some money, you're going to have a diverse team because that just makes good business sense. And so I am a product of that. The first MDL I was appointed co-lead by Judge Childs again is the most diverse at the time. I think hair relaxer has probably is the most recent example, but 3 years ago, when I was appointed co-lead of the Blackbod case, we had the most diverse slate, as reported by Law 360 in history. Mm-hmm. And what you're seeing now are many judges referencing diversity in their orders. And it is just not about gender or ethnicity. It's also about molding the younger generation in terms of leadership development committees, so that 5 years, 10 years from now, we're going to have people in the pipeline who can represent to the court that they've seen and been exposed to complex litigation. And they will then have that experience that I've talked about earlier that the judges look for. And so I think we're in a good place. I think this firm is really prepared. When we think of diversity, oftentimes we're thinking of the solo practitioner shops, but that's not necessarily true. There are medium-sized firms, and there are a lot of people like me, people of color, who work at large plaintiffs' firms. And so I think the team is far better off when you have a diverse group of lawyers leading those complex litigation cases. And I know that the clients are better off. When you look at industrial mass accidents, they often happen in poor communities. Nobody washing chicken manure in a rich neighborhood. You don't have a chemical plant on Park Avenue or Beverly Hills. Right. And so when I show up in these communities, I look like the people who've been impacted.
Yeah.
And so it just makes good sense all around, so that you can have lawyers not only talk to your clients, but also the jury and the judge. So we're coming full circle there.
Yeah. Well, I've seen the progress, the transformation just in the decade I have been involved. And I think more change is coming. I think we have a new generation emerging that are becoming of age to vote. And these, I want to call them kids. They're very different and they're conscientious, I think. And I think that hopefully the issues of race and gender are going to be in the next 2 decades something that, again, we hear and feel the impact less and less. But it's obvious that there has been a shift, that there has been a movement in the legal industry. And I attend a lot of conferences, as you probably do too. And you can see the panels. The panels look different. And so it's encouraging. I think certainly having good people with the right intentions that also represent all the groups and the minorities in our society is absolutely the way to go. I want to jump into the career, the second career you've had within while you're doing all of this, you've had a second career. I don't know how many people can say that. But what was it like, Marlon, to be state senator of South Carolina for a decade?
Let me just say this. It was the honor of my lifetime to represent over 130,000 people in Charleston and North Charleston, South Carolina, which comprises two counties, Charleston County and Dorchester County. Mm-hmm. It's been an honor of my lifetime, and quite frankly, a natural progression. Blotton Fells, that was the predecessor to Ness, Motley, Lode, Hope, Richardson, and Poole, its foundation was in politics. Bubba Ness was chief of the Supreme Court, and then we had Saul Blott, who was from a family who was very politically active, and whose relative was the Speaker of the House of the state of South Carolina. And so our orientation of the firm, predecessor firms, was political in nature. Yeah. And that is the case because we understand that somebody's got to do the legislative work. You saw this in Camp Lejeune, to make sure that we have a just and fair governmental system. Yeah. The justice can prevail in the form of litigating statutory laws and legislation which are not skewed to benefit corporations. And so being a trial lawyer, a defender of the civil justice system and right to trial by jury is just a natural extension of my roots, beginning growing up in Columbia, South Carolina with educated parents, all the way to matriculating at Morehouse and then being the president of the Student Trial Lawyer Association in law school, getting the Complete Lawyer Award when I graduated from law school, the highest honor. And I did not run for the state Senate lightly. In fact, I wasn't even looking to run for political office. But the senator, this was in 2013, resigned due to a scandal, my predecessor. And it was with great consultation with Motley Rice and Joe Rice that I made the decision to run because we knew it was too important. Yeah. We knew it was too important to have good people in our state house, not just defending the public justice system, but articulate voices who could represent the downtrodden, the looked over and laughed at, those in some circles considered the poor, the sick, the needy. Because what we often find, particularly in our red states, is that there is an enormous influence in politics, and that's the money coming in from large corporate donors and large corporate interests. Right. And so when the firm agreed that this was a good thing and consistent with the firm I ran, I'd never run for political office in my life. I'd had some volunteer positions, but I won. There were 5 people in the race. I think I had a runoff. I almost avoided the runoff by 2 or 3 points, but nevertheless, I won 80% in the runoff and then 95% or so in the general. I served, I got 1 by a similar margin in 3 different elections. And it was an honor of my lifetime. Now, to be clear, I took at a very critical time, took over in the state Senate at a critical time. Because not too long after I was sworn in, we had the shooting of Walter Scott Jr.
Yeah.
An unarmed African-American male who was pulled over for routine traffic violation. The officer's version of the story was totally different than what was caught on a cell phone video.
Right.
When the cell phone video was shown, flashed across television screens across the country, what it showed was Mr. Scott was pulled over for routine traffic violation. He feared for going to jail for some unpaid child support and took off running. The officer unloaded his service pistol 8 times in the back. Mr. Scott was shot and he died. When the video was released to the public, we had the national press in my Senate district, North Charleston.
Yeah.
And it took leadership to be able to galvanize the angst and the emotions and the despair, and to galvanize that into something progressive and meaningful and lasting. And I was the co-author. I was the co-sponsor of the Body Camera Act,
Right.
which South Carolina passed, the bill that I was the co-author of, and we became the first state in the nation to mandate the use of body-worn cameras.
Right.
And that's just an example of why it's important to have good legislators who can take horrific situations. Fast forward, less than 90 days after that, we had the horrific shooting in the church in Senate District 42, the Senate district I represented at the time, of Mother Emanuel African-American Episcopal Church, AME Church, that claimed the life of one of my Senate colleagues, Reverend Clemente Pickney. That was a horrific time. Now, mind you, we just had the shooting of Walter Scott. But what we did was use that as an opportunity. The shooter wore a Confederate flag, and he announced racist views under the banner of the Confederacy on his social media pages. So me and a number of other lawyers, former Senator Vincent Shaheen was one of those lawyers. He's a trial lawyer who's representing many governmental entities in the AFFF litigation.
Yeah.
It's his bill. And I aided him in the legal arguments that passed, which resulted in the removal of the Confederate flag in front of the State House. The legislature did that with many able trial lawyers who made the legal arguments, both in the House and the Senate. And so I say all that to say, I've seen a lot during the 10 years. I'm thankful to have a firm that has been very supportive of my work in the legislature. And believe me, it takes a lot of support because I was gone for 10 years, 3 days a week. Now, I still had to maintain my active caseload, but I had backup troops here to help me when I could not appear in a court or when I had a motion to file. And so I was fortunate in that respect. But the firm believes, just like we make volunteers for different nonprofit organizations and local boards here, the firm believes in giving back. And that was our way of giving back my time and also serving a benefit to the constituents that live in our state and also to some of our clients. I am able to go and articulate my law practice in the state Senate or on Capitol Hill. Now I am a advisor to the United States Trade Representative, Catherine Tai. I've left the Senate, and now I am in a part-time advisory committee position. Was appointed by President Biden. I was a member of his South Carolina team that turned the election around in 2020 and resulted to him being the president, and he didn't forget. And so next week I'll be at the White House, and I've been fortunate and blessed to have done the work so that he could be elected, starting in South Carolina. You can thank me later. We turned that election around, and now he's the president, but he didn't forget how he got to where he is. And we're very blessed to have him because he appreciates the jury system, the civil justice system that we has, and has many trial lawyer advisors in his circle.
So what was it like to get that call and to be appointed by the president? I mean, pretty thrilling, I assume. But
it's heavy stuff. It's heavy stuff. I almost tear up every time. Of course, it didn't just happen. People, oh, Marlon, you this and that. I had to. It's a process. I was appointed 3 years into his term, and it took me that long. My security clearance took 6 months. And so you don't just get a call out of the blue. This is a vetting process that you have to go through. A number of names being floated. I consider this to be one of, there are a lot of different positions, but this is akin to, in some way, the financial space that I operate in my law practice. And that's really what I wanted, an opportunity to serve the president, but also in some relation to what I do as a lawyer, and my interest here at the law firm. And so it was it's just every time I'm invited to the White House, I am just so humbled and honored that when you Google my name, you will read that the president actually appointed me to this position. In full circle, when it comes to my children, Marley and Marlon, they can be proud of their father for not only doing all the things that we've talked about today, but also my name will be next to President Joseph Biden.
No, I think you've just done so much in such a short period of time. It's pretty remarkable. And I know that does not come easy, right? You have to sort of be on the clock 24/7, like you said, and it takes everything. And it's not you have to be pulled, and it's clear when somebody's being pulled versus somebody's being pushed, right? And I think you're so lucky in so many respects that you have not only been intentional about finding what your purpose is, your highest purpose is, but you have also put in the hard work and the passion to be able to show results and to make the difference. Because at the end of the day, all of this is in the name of impact and contribution. And I think a lot of people in the business, it's funny, I'm in a master class with a lot of business people and entrepreneurs, and, they've reached the highest success, everything that you can imagine in terms of, you were talking about success is relevant, but monetary, value. And so for a lot of them, it was not fulfilling. And the next step was contribution. So the idea was, okay, you work this hard, you reach the pinnacle of what you think you need to reach, and then you get there and you realize you've got to do this, with other people, for other people. You have to give back. And so I think you understood contribution being at the core of everything that you do, and you didn't waste any time. So I'm very, very impressed and very proud of you, and to know you and to have seen your journey, because I draw inspiration from you. And, I wasn't born here in this country, and I came here. And in fact, working, I couldn't really at the time afford to go to law school, and became a mom pretty early in life. But I ended up working in the legal world and seeing, again, I come from an Eastern European country, and I've seen the world enough to know that even though this system is not perfect, it's probably the best system in the world. And people take it for granted all the time. You get hit by a car in Europe, you don't go to trial. You don't get $1 million for your, for your injury. So it is not perfect, but it is better than what is anywhere else in the world. And so for those reasons, I think you get so much credit for your work, and just blows my mind that you're a dad, and you are in the legal career, and you are in politics. And so tell me a little bit about work-life balance. What is that like for you? Is there one?
I have some, I have a schedule. I'm a single father. I'm divorced. And so, for example, I was up at 5 a.m. this morning to do a little workout before I woke the kids up. And I have to get them to school by 7:15. And then that enables me to get to the office early. I'm not going to Columbia to the State House anymore. When I go to DC, it's part-time. And so actually leaving the state Senate and being an advisor to the president has allowed me to spend more time with my children. And then I work pretty much a full day. Tonight, there's a reception for my former colleagues. So we're going to raise a little money for the Senate Democratic Caucus. And then don't have the kids tonight. So I'm going to have a nice quiet meal. I have to prepare to go to the vice president's house at the the first part of next week. So I got to make sure I have some clothes because that's going to be followed by a White House visit next week. Yeah. In the meantime, I have a brief, a short brief due tomorrow by 5 o'clock in one of the cases I'm involved in. We filed one last night by midnight on the West Coast. And so I have to have a schedule. I got a good assistant who keeps both my personal schedule and my office schedule and my political schedule. I was fortunate enough to have funds left over from my campaign when I was in the state Senate to do community-oriented projects and have a staff person that keeps me plugged in and engaged there. Yeah. And so it's really a question of time management. Of course, I have to work out and got a good doctor and a good physical trainer because you can do all of this, and this, you got little kids, but if you don't have your health, you won't have much to give back to your children. And so I don't have much time, but when I do have some time, I have a small boat. I like to get out on the boat and get in the harbor, and I have a good group of friends. We talk about everything, business, making some money, doing business ventures. That's the other beautiful thing about this firm. You look at Joe Rice, he's not just a great lawyer, but the man knows business. And so he's an inspiration because he recognizes opportunities. And I don't know what all he's involved in, but he has a lot of things he's involved in. But it's inspirational because just like this law firm is diversified, your personal life has to be diversified. You don't ever think there's a rule of thumb. Don't put all the eggs in one basket. Okay. Yeah, sure. And that's a principle by which I guide my life. and I try to teach my children.
So Marlon, what's next in terms of, is there anything, or do you see yourself retiring or getting away from politics and law and just like going off the radar? Like, do you have those? I have those thoughts. I don't know if you do. Like, is there some grand plan?
I hadn't really thought about going off the radar. I got two little ones, so I don't have the luxury at this point. I'm still relatively young, so I plan to continue to work. But I think diversification is important. I've looked at some business opportunities. I might write a book one day, do some speaking engagements.
So more work.
Yeah, more work. But look, when you got gas in the tank, you push the pedal. And there'll be one day where I do want to just go off the radar. But, these are my prime years, not only with my children, but my law practice. As you know, the law can be exhausting. And when you start getting a little older, your desire to be up all night, and I'm not anywhere near that point, but your age tends to lead you to start thinking about going off the radar and going to take a sabbatical. People do this. I've never heard. I mean, I've heard of it, but I never thought about it. And so I really am living my best life. I really am. And I don't plan to slow down. I'm enjoying myself. I love my law practice. I love the interplay between politics and the law. I'm in a less aggressive position. I'm not filing bills and arguing with people about things like using horseworm medication for COVID vaccines or fighting extreme abortion measures, 6 weeks, et cetera. But I'm able to now focus on my law practice and my children and these other opportunities that we've talked about. So I'm fired, as I say on the political stump, I'm fired up and ready to go.
Well, look, it has been so nice to catch up with you today, honestly. And this podcast had to be the excuse, but it really just feels like two old friends coming together and catching up on life. It's just so nice to hear. And, one of these days we need to get together and talk about business because, I'm also in the middle of it and I love what I do. I also find myself to be very pulled. Lejeune, as you know, was a project I was heavily involved in, and it was right there in your neck of the woods. And so I definitely want to, I want to visit. I want to visit with you in person, and we'll have to do that one of these days. So thank you for making time for me today. I appreciate you more than you know, and I'm just so very proud of you. So
I consider this a privilege. You've had some of the greats. I watch your podcast, and you've had some of the greats. So the pleasure is mine. I appreciate the opportunity. I really do. And I'm going to take you up on coming to see me. Let's stop talking about it and do it.
That's right. I agree. Right. Thank you, Marlon. Have a great rest of your afternoon. Talk soon. Stay tuned for upcoming episodes available on popular platforms such as iTunes, Spotify, and YouTube.